Good afternoon, E39 source. Colton here with my 2001 540i6. Today, I will be giving you a very lengthy and long-winded instructional video on how to replace the struts in your E39 540. The process should be very similar in an M5 and very similar in lesser 6-cylinder E39 models. There will be a few variations in the i6 models, especially with the steering, but other than that, everything should be pretty much the same. So I'm going to take a quick peek in here, and as you can see, I currently have Bilstein Sport struts in my 540. So this is an instructional video of what you're going to need to do and the correct procedure, or at least what I did, to get my struts changed in this car without paying a few $1,000s at a mechanic to get it done. Now, most of this strut video was taken back in November or December, and that was a while ago, seeing as it is now March 4th, 2013. So without further ado, here is how to replace the struts in your E39 540. I hope you enjoy. If you have any questions or I missed any steps, go ahead. Feel free to leave a comment down below, and I will do my best to assist you in replacing your struts in your E39. Alright, before you get started, there are a few prerequisites you need to get in line. Firstly, you need a space to do this in. You can't just do this on a San Francisco hill that's a 45-degree angle. That's not going to work. You need to find a flat, dry, preferably dry, place to do this in. In my case, it's a garage. This will do just fine. Next, you need something to get the front of this pig up in the air. I'm going to start with the front first, because I think it'll be slightly more involved, and involved as far as suspension is concerned. So I'm going to start with the front first. So what I need to do is I need to take these ramps that I built out of 2x10s. These were about $6 a piece, so I have $12 worth of ramps here. Took me about 40 minutes to get them together, just need to make some cuts. These are all 45-degree angles. The bottom piece is 4 feet long. The center piece is 2.5 feet long, and the top piece is 1.5 feet long, if I remember correctly. And you can see they're just screwed in with screws from the bottom. You don't even see any screws. Just make sure your screws aren't too long, or when you drive upon it, your tires will be punctured, and that's never good. So the next thing you need to do is you need to grab your ramps, and you need to shove them under where your tires are going to be. Be very careful to line them up before you drive up on them. Do not have them crooked, and make sure they are secured into the floor very tightly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull my car out of the garage, basically throw these ramps underneath. I'm going to back up onto them, and I'm going to do this with the car facing this direction. To jack the car up, I only have this much space, so I'm probably going to need to open up the garage door, but that shouldn't be an issue. About 15 minutes later, and a good little bit of fighting because of all the steps here, getting into the garage and then getting on 3 steps of ramps, the 540 is in and perfectly parked. No room to spare. So, now I'm going to grab my 3-ton jack, stick it under the front, and I will show you the jack point once we are under there. Alright, so what you're going to want to do now is take your jack, put it under here, and look for this jack point located right here. That's your center middle jack point. The one right there. You're going to want to slide your floor jack in under that. Obviously make contact and begin to lift. Next, you're going to need to get your breaker bar or your torque wrench or whatever you use and get these bolts out of your wheel. I currently have the jack under the car taking about 10 pounds of force off the suspension. If you take all the load off your suspension, this is a rear-wheel drive car, and your front wheels will just spin. So, keep that noted. Break your nuts loose before you jack your car in the air. Now that I have all of my bolts free on both sides, I'm going to jack up this car and get the rest of the process underway. Once you have your car up in the air, you can go ahead and put 2 jack stands underneath your car. One on that side, one on this side, on your normal jacking points. Just make sure they're on, make sure they're not on there badly, and make sure they have a secure mounting point to the vehicle. You don't want your car sliding off these. Then you're going to want to let your jack down. When you let your jack down, the car might shift a little bit. Don't be too afraid. It's the nature of the beast. Next, you want to take your jack and put a few more pounds of force back up into that. If your jack went the whole way down, jack it up and jack the car up. Take about 10 to 100 pounds off these jack stands, just as an added security. So if these fail, that's holding it, and if this fails, these are holding it. Once you're done with that, go ahead, push your car around. If it doesn't fall, you're in good shape. Go ahead, take your front driver's side wheel off. That's the side I'm going to start on. You can start with your passenger side, but for this tutorial, we're going to work on the driver's side. So, now that your bolts are already loose, you should theoretically be able to just pull them right out and pop your wheel off. Now, be prepared. Be ready to take the weight of this wheel. Because if you don't take the weight of this wheel will come down on the top of the rotor. It's not good. Be ready. Alright, the next step is to grab an 18mm socket. I have an 18mm socket accompanied with a 3/8 inch ratchet and a 3/8 to 1/2 inch bar. I may have to get a bigger socket. Depends on if I can break the 2 bolts that we are going to be breaking free back here. The bolts we are going to be breaking free are this bolt right here and another bolt down below. Here is a clearer image of those 2 same bolts from a tutorial I found online. Credit goes to bisonsystems.com. The 2 bolts we're going to be removing is this bolt and this bolt down here. They are the brake caliper carrier bolts, and if you go around front here, you can kind of get an idea of where they are on the rotor. If you cannot get yours loose, if they are on there very, very tight, you're going to want to go get a can of this stuff. PB Penetrating Blaster. Now I'm going to pull off the caliper. To pull off the caliper itself and the mounting bracket, which is basically what we're about to do, you remove the bolts completely, and the caliper is probably going to weigh a few pounds. Alright, well it has been roughly 20 minutes since I have last filmed, and since then I have gotten both of these bolts out. All I needed to do was and what you need to do once you get those out, the caliper will probably not fall off the rotor, but what you need to do is you do need to be careful. Make sure you support this. This weighs probably 10 to 15 pounds. It is a very heavy piece of steel and aluminum with brake lines attached. If you drop this down here, you are going to be paying monies, okay? So be careful. Keep that noted. Now, with that in mind, you're going to want to gently slide it off the rotor. Just keep wiggling it back and forth. Now, when it does come off, you're going to be in a very tight situation because you're going to be supporting this thing. Either you're going to be standing up or sitting on the ground like I currently am. You're going to need to lift this up, hold it with your arm, so hopefully you are decently strong, and attempt to place it back on this control arm. In my case, a piece of wire, and you are going to want to wire it up to this piece of the frame. You can see I cleaned mine a little bit because it had some oil and grease on it from 210,000 miles of driving. So, now that you have that wired up, supported, make sure it's not going anywhere, make sure there's some play in the lines so they're not tight, and you can move on to the next step. So I've been out here, and it's been a little while longer. I have been trying to figure out what exactly I need to do, because tutorials don't fit this car. Isn't that great? So, I have been reading a bunch of different things, and I know I need to remove this. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to unbolt this, and then I'm basically going to go from there. I'm actually probably going to go up into the hood and start to unbolt the strut. I'm not exactly sure what the next step after that is, but I'm just going to kind of take this one step at a time and try to figure it out as I go. So to get this off, which we need to remove, what you need to do is you need to grab a 17mm open-ended wrench, and you also need to grab a small set of pliers or something along those lines. They need to be skinny, whatever they are, because you don't want to rip up this seal back here. This seal is very delicate, and what you need to do is there's a flat piece of metal right on the inside of this. When this is on here, this goes in here like this. There's a flat piece of metal. You can feel it with these. Around here you can see that just went on. What you need to do is, this is going to be tight, and this seal, this rubber seal in here is going to be tight up against here. Don't rip up this rubber seal. Be very careful with these pliers. But once you have that out of the way, you can just kind of put that down there and move on to the next step. The next step is coming up to the top of the strut mount and popping that cap off. Sometimes they're tighter, sometimes they're looser. It all depends on your car. So, after that, you can go ahead and start to remove the strut bolts. The next step is to remove these 3 bolts. One here, one here, one here, obviously. What you're going to want to do is grab your 13mm socket, preferably Craftsman, throw it on there, and get cranking. The next step is to remove your tie rod wheel carrier nut. I believe that's what it's called. If I have the terminology wrong, I apologize. You're going to need an 18mm combo wrench, and you're going to want to take that right off. Alright, what we need to do now, once we have that nut off, is to grab your ball joint tool. You could probably pound on this with a hammer if you don't feel like buying the ball joint tool. However, I highly advise against that, and I would never do that to my suspension. So what you're going to need to do, I can't do this with one hand, but what you're going to need to do is take this, basically tuck it under here, underneath the boot, throw this on, and start to clamp down from the top. That will allow you to pop this bolt out, basically pushing this out of here. It's a very simple idea, and you should be able to do it if you own the right size ball joint tool. By the way, I picked this up on either eBay or Amazon for right around $40. Not too bad at all. It should look like this once you use your ball joint tool to pop out your tie rod. You could just, like I did, mount your tie rod up here. The next step is to remove this nut and this bolt. You're going to want to use an 18mm combo wrench and a 16mm socket to do the job. That's what it should look like once you get that bolt out. I ended up having to grab this giant breaker bar to get it out, but once I did, it was fairly simple. Just had to get some torque on it, and didn't have an issue after that. So, that's what your wheel well area should look like at the moment. And now all you have to do is go back up top, remove that one bolt, and I believe we should be able to start prying. Now, before we pull this strut assembly out of the car, I would recommend putting some tape over your wheel well here. I'm going to use electrical tape and just throw a piece right over here, so when we pull this down and out, and it's kind of touching here, it doesn't ruin it. Alright, so all I needed to do was release that one nut that I had up here, and then I took this socket extension and this mallet, and basically stuck the socket extension right on the center nut here, and then just hit it a few times, and it fell right out. So if you have trouble strut, that's what you need to do. Now, this is hanging decently free inside of the wheel well. You can see there is play up and down. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to basically just pull this down and then push out. When I get the top of this to right here, I'm going to pull out and set it right here. So once you get your strut out, it should look like this. The next step is the last step. Believe it or not. Isn't that great? Be careful at this step, by the way. Your brake lines will be very tight, and you need to be very careful. This is when you need to be careful, essentially. Don't put too much strain on these. Mine are still a little bit loose. I wouldn't let it down any more than this. So, the last step to the removal process is to stick a screwdriver, if I can find it right here, a screwdriver into this slot right here and basically pry this open. We remove the bolts from here and here, and now we can just pry this open and pull this strut out and toward us. I'm going to do that now. Can't do that on camera, so I'll talk to all of you in a little bit. There's the strut. When you pull the strut out, this is going to basically fall free, and you are going to need to put something under it. I just have a jack stand with a towel on top of it, and the rotor is just chilling on that. So this is all good now until we need to replace it with the Bilstein Sport strut. The next step is to take your spring removal tools and put them on opposite sides of your strut spring, just like this. What we're going to need to do now is we're going to need to tighten down these bolts, alternating sides rather frequently. When all is said and done, this is what it should look like. Now we can move on to the next step of removing this top piece, pulling the spring off, and putting it all on the new Bilstein strut. Alright, this is when you have to get creative. So, essentially what I had to do to get this bolt off, and it's still not completely off, but it's loose now at least, you have to get creative. I got 2 pieces of PVC piping, just old PVC piping I had laying around, and I grabbed lock pliers and put tape on them so they didn't screw up the bolt too badly, and locked them onto this bolt. I also took an Allen key, the 6mm Allen key you need, stuck it in there, locked it in with some tape, make sure that didn't fly out, threw a piece of PVC on that, used the floor as leverage, stuck that down there. Then, with these locked onto the bolt, took a piece of PVC piping, stuck it up onto the handle, and basically just pushed down. This had nowhere to go. This took me about an hour and a half to figure out. Yes, it took me that long. I did everything under the sun to try to figure this out prior, and I had no luck. So, if you have a serious issue with this, go ahead, do what I did. It should work for you. With that fully disassembled, we can get a comparison shot of the Billy Sports versus the OEM Sport suspension struts off of a 540. I'd say that's a pretty severe difference right there. The actual strut itself is the same size. However, from here up, I'd say the Bilsteins take the cake. So, I'm going to start reassembly here. I would assume just completely do the opposite of what I just did. Throw that pad back onto there, throw that onto there, and so on and so forth. Putting this back together is pretty self-explanatory. You're just going to want to take your mounting bracket, take this, throw it in there, and then line these up with the indentations on here and pop this on. Then once you get this installed, you can throw the shock mount on to the bottom of this, throw this onto this like so, and then pop this back on. Once you have your strut tower completely assembled, you're going to want to grab your new bolt. This bolt will, however, be 22mm if you are running Bilsteins, and 21mm if you're running the OEM struts. Mine is going to be 22. So what I'm going to do now is throw this on here, tighten this down completely, and then start releasing the springs. And it is now together, minus the spring being uncompressed. No, when you put it together, make sure that these 2 screws are lined up with this. This faces the direct outside of the fender. So, if you look in your hood over here, you will notice that there are 2 holes right here facing the outside of your fender. So that way, when you put it up here and you have tension on the suspension, you don't have any issues. So now I'm going to start releasing off of these bolts right here, and I'm going to let the spring basically go back up. Now, what I'm watching for is there is a lip right in the underside of this seal right here at the very top, this little pad. You need to make sure that when this spring is coming up, that this little piece right here goes into that little corner crack right here. If it's somewhere over here, it'll really screw some stuff up. So be careful with that, and just be careful with these springs. Once you have everything put together and the spring uncompressed, it should look just like this. As you can see, my things are pretty much lined up, as well as the one up here. And this is ready to go back into the car. To put this back into the car, you follow complete reverse procedure from what you did to get it out. So, what we're going to do first is we are going to drop that jack down and throw this into that hole. Now that we have the strut installed from the top, we can start to work on the bottom. That includes replacing the nut in the back, holding the strut in, the tie rod over here, and the other suspension link over here. Now that we have our cables and our bolt back in here, we can then move on to the tie rod. My tie rod is very, very loose here. I haven't tightened the bolt, and I haven't tightened the bolt over here yet either. When those two things are still loose, what you should do, it's a really good thing to do for all of your bushings and everything, is to jack the wheel and suspension on this side up to ride height. Take note that to get your ball joint back together, you need to use a 5.5 millimeter hex key. What you need to do is you need to use an open end wrench along with this hex key in the same way you did the struts. Once you get your ball joint tightened and you get this tightened, you can then move back on to throwing your brake caliper back on. By this point, it should feel very sturdy and it should not feel like it's in bad shape. It should be pretty much perfect by this point. So, throw your brake rotor back on, reverse process. Here are your two bolts. Don't lose them. And go ahead and throw these in. And this is what the finished front should look like. Once you have everything back installed into your car, you have your brake caliper back on along with your clip. So, that's what it should look like around the other side. Might as well walk over here, take a look at that. The side that I showed you guys while I was doing. Same deal. Looks great. So, now I'm going to drop the car and move to the back. We first need to start in the interior to prep our car for the strut removal. What you need to do first is remove your headrests. Simply push up from the bottom and all three will pop right out. The next step is to remove the C-pillar lights. What you're going to do is you're going to take a pry tool, such as this, stick it right up behind this light and pry out. Mine's about to fall out because they're not in there very tightly. And on the back of that there is a nice little plug that just unplugs simply and you can set the lights aside. The next step is to remove the bottom of the back seat. Many of you have probably already done this. And if you haven't, all you have to do is reach your hand right under here, pull up like that. It's going to pop up and do the same on the other side and then pull the seat right out. Note to keep watch for your seatbelt buckles as they will get caught. Just take your time and make sure it comes out the right way. The next step is to remove these two 10 millimeter bolts right here in the corner of the seat. One on each side. Once you have those bolts removed and stored in a safe location, you can then, through your driver's side door, grab the bottom of the seat, slide your seatbelt off, and lift up and out. You're going to want to slide those seatbelts off as well. Alright, the next step after you get the rear seat backing out is to remove these three baby seat locking panels. This is a 13 millimeter bolt with a washer and a nut. Keep track of everything, don't lose them. The next step is to remove your center headrest. This is held in by four 4 millimeter hex keys. The next step is to remove these 4 rivets holding in the rear deck. I already removed this one, so I could know exactly how to do it. And how you do it is you take a screwdriver and you stick it up behind the rivet and start to pry a little bit. Just be careful, don't get over crazy with this. Then, pry up a little bit from the side, get like 1/8 of an inch between the carpeting and the rivet. Then, once you do that, you can then slide your screwdriver up behind, stick it right up next to the rivet like that, and pry up. Be careful, but it should pop right out. This is just a simple little trick that I found that makes it much easier. The next step is to remove 2 bolts located behind the C-pillar light. Make sure you pull those out, then easily slide the trim forward and out. When you pull out your C-pillar trim, there are two bolts, one here, like I showed you, and there are also two clips, one here and one here. So when it's in the car, it's going to look like this, and you're going to have them at the top. Just make sure you take those out carefully, just pull straight toward you, and they should pop right out. The next step is to remove the seat belt buckle trim. You're going to stick a screwdriver or a trim removal tool right under here, pry up, and then pull down. The next step is to remove your seat belts. What you need to do is you need to locate the bolt down here. There's one right here. Your other ones are located right here and over there. So, once you locate your seatbelt bolt, you can take it off using a 17mm socket and pop it right out. After you get your seatbelts disconnected, you can pull the shelf out toward you, stuff them through the holes, and then pull the shelf out toward you and remove it from the vehicle. Once you have your tray out of the car, you need to remove your speakers. There are two mounting screws, one here, one here. Once you have those out, simply pull the speakers out of the car. As it turns out, we do not need to remove all of this. If you look over here underneath the speaker, you can lift this up, and this rubber thing is covering your strut tower. So there you go. We're done, and we can move on to the next step. The next step is to get the rear of this car off the ground. So what you need to do is, if it's a manual transmission, put the handbrake on and throw it in first gear. If it is an automatic, I would say throw it in park and throw the handbrake on, and you should be good. The next thing you need to do is you need to take 4 bricks or something, or wheel chocks if you have them, and chock the front wheels. You don't want this thing rolling off the jack stands and going through the garage door or going through the wall. Okay? You don't want that. That's bad. Keep that noted. So, once you get that, you can take your floor jack, move it around the back of the car, and lift from the jack point. The middle jack point on the rear of the car is the diff. So, it'll be a little flat piece. I'll go ahead and show you right back here. The diff is fairly easy to find if you know anything about cars. It's the only flat thing in the center of the car down there. So lift from that and get the car in the air and on jack stands. Your 2 jack stand points are the same as in the front. There are 2 pads under here, and you can just put your jack stands right under there. Once you get the car in the air, you can go ahead and take the rear wheels off. For instructional purposes, I'm going to do the driver's side on video. I'll let you figure out the passenger side on your own. They will be very, very similar. However, they may have very minute differences. Firstly, you need to remove these 2 8mm mudguard screws underneath the car. The next step is to remove these 2 10mm bolts holding the mudguard on. The next step is to remove these 3 rivets, one located here, one located here, and one located right up here. What you're going to do is you are going to stick a flathead screwdriver underneath here, and the same as in the rear deck, you're going to start it, then stick your screwdriver up under here and pry. They should pop right out. There is one more 8mm bolt located right to the left of the rotor on the bottom of the fender well. Once it is out of the car, it should look like that. There are a few things I need to tell you. When you're taking it out, you need to stick something under here. I use that screwdriver. You have to be very careful if you're using a screwdriver because this is a metal body panel. What you need to do is you need to stick it under here and pry this out. This sits under here under a lip. The other thing you need to do is under this, there is a very tiny, another pry clip, whatever they're called. Those little clips that you pulled out from around here. There is another one right here. So you have a clip here, you have a bolt under here, you have 2 bolts here, and 3 clips back here, and 2 bolts here. A little bit complicated. Anyways, we are now ready to move on to the next step and start the removal process. The next step is to take a board 9 1/4 inches for a 540i6 and slide it in between the H bracket here and the frame. This is going to provide us with a brace between this and the frame, so when we remove the strut, this can't shoot up. To put this wood block in place, you will need to essentially stand on this. Do not stand on this, stand on this. lean at least 100 pounds on this, get the suspension to go down at least a half an inch, slide this in here. Mine's in here pretty tightly, it's not going to move around, I don't believe. So I'm in good shape. The next step is to remove the 21 millimeter shock mount bolt. You're going to want to grab your 21 millimeter socket wrench or open end wrench and get that off. In order to get an angle I can work with, I was forced to remove this bolt, and I'm going to need to move this and this out of the way so I can get an angle with a ratchet on the back of the strut. That's what it should look like when you're done. Getting this bolt out is a real pain in the ass, so be prepared. You're going to have to get all your tools and just see what fits. It's a very tight area. You only have this little bit between the brake line and the upper control arm to work in, and it is a real pain. You'll get it eventually, but it's not going to come easily. The next step is to drop the fuel evaporation tank. What you need to do is you need to undo this 10 millimeter bolt, unclasp these, and then bring the whole tank down and set it down. Note that when you pull your fuel evaporator tank out, it should sit right about here. There are two clips right up here. There's one clip that holds these fuel lines to this. What I did was I pulled that clip out so I could bring this down. Just be very careful with this. Don't break anything. Don't force anything. You'll be fine. Just forcing things is asking for trouble. Alright? So don't ever force anything. And that's what it looks like up under there if you were curious. At this point, you are going to need to come back into the car, lift up the speaker assembly liner here, and take these 13 millimeter bolts out, all three of them. And there's the old strut out of the car. To get that out of the car, I had to play around with this and basically just squeeze it out of here. It's a very, very tight fit, and I'm sure getting the other one in will also be a very tight fit. So now what we need to do is we need to take our spring compression tool, compress the spring, loosen this with a socket wrench and a pair of lock pliers, get this all apart, install it on the new Bilstein, however you say it, strut, and get this moving back into the car. When you put your spring compression tools on, you want to make sure that they are on complete opposite sides. So that would be one here and one on the other side. Now, some of you may have noticed this. Yeah, that is probably what you think it is. That is a broken spring. Well, here's the thing. I don't have another set of springs laying around for this. I was planning on reusing these since I believed that they were good. Now that I know they aren't, I'm going to put these back on and use it how it is, with these springs on the new struts. Yeah, that's right. I'm going to use the broken spring. In the future, in the next month or so, I will be ordering new springs for this car, and I will put those on at a later date. So these won't be on very long, but they will be on for a while. So if you have a broken spring and you need to pass inspection, hide it as best you can. I'm probably going to put this old one back on here like this, just kind of sit it down here and hope that they don't notice. Now that you have your spring reinstalled onto your new strut, you can go ahead and put it into the car. You're going to need to throw the strut down in here between the drive shaft and a few other little things down here, some control arms and stuff. And you're going to have to squeeze it down there. Then you're going to have to just wiggle the whole thing in there and try to get it up behind this tank. It's going to take some time and some effort, but everyone should be able to do it if you give it time. Once you have your strut into your strut tower mounts, you can go ahead and install your screws. Now I have my strut in. What I ended up having to do was take a 3-foot long 2x4 and pry on the brake rotor like this. What I had to do was shove that 2x4 in on the frame and pry down on this while I threw the strut in here. What happened was, even though I threw that 2x4 between the suspension and the frame, it still shifted up about 1/4 to 2/3 of an inch. So I needed to get that fixed. So prying down on this rotor fixed my problem and allowed me to slide this right in and bolt it right onto the rotor. So, didn't really have an issue after that. Now I need to throw my control arm back together and get some of those stuff back together inside here, as well as I think it's the fuel evaporator tank. Put your fuel evaporation tank in. You're going to want to lift it up and push it back into one tab over here, one tab over here. There's a little hole on the frame of the car, and you're just going to want to put the two plastic tabs from the back of this into those holes. It's going to take you between 10 minutes and half an hour, okay? It's not an easy thing to do. Be careful of these tubes and wires back here. They will provide a lot of spring tension on the top of this thing. And it'll take a good bit of effort and actually a good bit of strength to keep this thing up and get this thing in. Once you have it up and in, just put your little plastic bolt back on and you're good to go. Next step, as you should have done before, disconnect this. You're going to want to go up here, reconnect that into there, and the next step is to throw the fender liner in. Once you get your two mounting bolts for your wheel well liner in, you can start to work the wheel well liner into the wheel well. What you're going to need to do is you're going to need to start right back here by the back corner, and you are going to need to just push this in. Basically, you're going to have this lip, and you're just going to want to push this up into the lip of the wheel well. Once you do that, the next step is to put your mud guard on. This is very hard for me to do because inside these holes is rusted out for me. That's really the only rust on the body of this car is right here on the back of each door. Not really sure why, but I guess just living in the Northeast, salt got in there and rusted it out. But I got them in. They're holding decently tight. I'm sure you could also use glue or something to hold that on. Not sure what I can do in the future. Might be able to buy screws and like put a nut on the inside of here. Not really sure, but I guess that's something you've got to figure out owning an older BMW. The next step is to put your bolt in on your wheel well liner right there. Then we can move on to the back. The rest is fairly simple. You just need to put your bolt in under here. You need to put your 4 tabs in over here, 1 under here on the frame mount right here, and 3 back here. 1 here, 1 here, and 1 here. Once you have those in and you make sure everything is lined up and perfect and these bolts are in and there's nothing hitting and this isn't leaning against any suspension parts and it's secure, you're done. Move on to your other side. The next thing you need to do is you need to remove your fuel filler cap and stuff a paper towel in the inner opening of your fuel cap. The next thing you're going to need to do is come down here and remove this bolt and remove the bolt right up here. Clean as well. And that's what your finished product should be. So what you have to do is you have to basically just pull this toward the middle of the car and down towards you. Be very careful. Don't leave this like this very long. Obviously this is an older car. The rubber in here is older and I don't feel like having to buy a new piece for this hose at the moment. So keep that down like that as short of a time as possible. Now my strut is out of this side too. So I can go ahead and swap that over and throw that back into the car the same way we did the other side. Once you get your strut back installed into your car, before you put the bolt in, go ahead and hook up all your fuel hoses again. It's just a matter of pushing it up here and pulling it, not through this side, but pushing it on the other side back through here, then reinstall your fuel filler cap and install your 2 bolts that hold this puppy in. So, now that's where I am. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to prime my wheel down a little bit and I'm going to insert the bolt for the back of the strut. The reason I am prying my wheel down a little bit is something that all of you should take note of, and I didn't quite take as much note of as I probably should have on the other side. Let me try to get back here with you. Okay. Look right here. You can see it's pretty well lined up, but it could be a little bit better if I pried down my wheel. So, that's what I'm going to do, and that's how it's going to be. Once I get that bolt in, you might have noticed I replaced this control arm. That will be in a separate E39 source video, so if you want to know how to do that, go ahead, check out that video. That's not going to be in this video. However, after that, I will need to preload my suspension. You don't need to preload your suspension as long as you don't disconnect any of these components in your control arms, your swing arms, any of that. However, since I did that, I will need to preload my suspension and get that done. Once you get your car supported on jack at its natural level, you can torque down these bolts. I had to torque mine down by feel because my torque wrench wouldn't fit in here. However, if you have a torque wrench, look up the torques for these bolts. I believe this one is 91 or 89 for this one, and I believe the torques for these bolts are 101 for this one and 99 or 81. I believe the torques for these bolts are 101 for this one and 89 for that one. Don't hold me to that. So you can do it the way I did it. Just make sure they're tight enough that they're not going to come out, and the suspension can still function properly. Just make sure everything is seated properly. Make sure the back is done correctly. Make sure everything is nice and tight. And now you can let that down. So now with that entire process out of the way, go ahead, drop your car, drive it, bring it in and out of your driveway, anything you need to do to get these struts broken in. What's going to happen is your car will be sitting several inches too high. There will be a lot of gap between your wheel and the fender, a lot more than there was. What you're going to need to do is you are going to need to break them in. That means going over bumps. Not large potholes, but tiny potholes. If you have them around, go over them. Anything to make the strut compress. By the way, for God's sake, before you do this, make sure your alarm is off. That could be really bad. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.